Welcome to the Yasmine Mohammed podcast. Today we have with us Ahmed Alkhatib. Ahmed was born and raised in Gaza, and I'm very excited to be talking with him today. My brother from another father, actually, because it's my dad who's also from Gaza. So we will talk all about, obviously, you growing up, and then what's happening in Israel today. And just wanted to thank you so much for your time, Ahmed. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thanks for the opportunity. Pleased to be here.
So let's start off by what was it like growing up in Gaza? We're all hearing all of these conflicting stories all the time. Media wants to give one image, everybody's giving whatever image they want to give. Now, you told us that you left in 2005, so that's, I guess, just as Hamas were moving in. So just tell us a bit about your childhood and any maybe interactions that you had with Hamas, and if they were part of the reason why you left, or just tell us about young Ahmed.
Certainly. Well, thanks again, Yasmine, and thanks all for joining. So I grew up going back and forth for a small part of my childhood in between Gaza and Saudi Arabia. Actually, my dad was a physician in Saudi Arabia, as is common with a lot of Palestinians, professionals, engineers, doctors, nurses, teachers. And so I left in 2005. I was 15. It was part of a U.S. exchange program. It was a post 9/11 initiative to improve the cultural ties between the United States and the Arab and Muslim world. So it was, the idea was you come here as a high school teenager. You go to a local high school. You live with a U.S. host family, and then you experience the life in the United States. Yes, lots of Palestinians in Saudi, and then you return to your native land and hopefully build cultural bridges. Upon attempting to return in 2006, Hamas had already won the infamous parliamentary elections in the spring of 2006. I was in Egypt, for Gazans before or after the second Intifada. The short-lived airport was destroyed. And so the only way that you could actually enter Gaza for the majority of Gazans is you had to land in Egypt and then take a taxi or a cab all the way from Cairo across the Sinai Desert or Sinai Peninsula, northern Sinai, to the Rafah border crossing. I was in Egypt trying to cross in, but Hamas had done a military operation that abducted the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit in June of 2006. And this was followed up by the 2006 33-day war between Hezbollah in Lebanon and Israel. So I was in Egypt, unable to return, and there were also threats against the program that I participated in. It was even though cultural exchange programs have been around for years, it was somewhat of a novel idea in a Gaza/Palestinian context to send young kids to the West, if you will. And so kind of generalized dangers coupled with specific threats that I thought were gonna potentially materialize led to me returning to the US thanks to the help of a lot of friends. And my US mom, I call her, she's neither Palestinian nor Arab or Muslim, and even a Holocaust survivor, actually, who helped finance my return to the United States. And I came here, settled in the Bay Area, applied for political asylum status while I was finishing high school. It was actually a height of irony that the very day that I had my asylum interview was June 14th, 2007, which is the day that Hamas took over, kind of bolstering my case. I was one of the first wave of Palestinians to receive asylum in the United States due to Hamas's control. So stepping back a little bit, going back to what your question was about, growing up in Gaza, which obviously, I left coming up on 18, 19 years ago. So in 19 years, I should say, in July 2nd of this year. Nevertheless, I've kept close contact with my immediate and extended family, most of whom are in Gaza. Gaza to me was not an on-off button just because I lived in the United States. And, the funny thing is, because I don't have much of an accent, people think that I'm so Americanized and so out of touch. And it's like, there's no winning. It's like, if I had an accent, then people wouldn't. Anyway, we'll talk about the accent stuff in a second. But so no, I've absolutely kept in contact with Gaza. You know, I've my siblings. I have two brothers and two sisters. And they're all married. I'm the black sheep. I'm the youngest. I'm the only one who's not married. The only one doesn't have kids. The only one who doesn't have children. Sorry, the only one who's not in the medical field. I meant to say. I went into business and international relations and politics. I'm an abject failure by Palestinian standards, and so multiple things were and are true, or I should say were true up to, let's talk about like October 7th. Of course, Gaza has always kind of been somewhat isolated, surrounded by Israel on all sides, and it was not as open as different parts of the West Bank were, and then by Egypt on the other. Gaza society is a little bit different than the Palestinian folks in the West Bank. And I'm talking about subcultures. Nevertheless, even with the Intifada, even with the violence, even with the hardships and misery, there was a lot of beauty. There were a lot of beautiful places and moments, and people adapt and people persevere and people make beautiful memories. I mean, you even look at images of Gaza before October 7th, and there were beautiful restaurants and beautiful areas and beautiful parks, and the beaches were always full of life, and it was an escape as people were also experiencing hardships, became aid dependent, lived in crowded, unsanitary conditions. So like multiple things can be true at once. It is also true that a large number of Gazans have never actually left the coastal enclave, the Strip. So the idea is a lot of Gazans are, and though social media and online connectivity has changed quite a bit of that for a lot of people. So for me, growing up in Gaza, and again, I was actually born in Saudi, even though our family kept moving back and forth. I lived a few years of my life in Saudi, but every year we would go in twice, and then in 96 and 97, we moved back to Gaza, and then we moved back to Saudi. And finally, in 2000, my dad was like, "Khalas, we're moving back permanently." So the 90s was an incredible time of optimism due to the Oslo process. And there was also, Gaza was a lot more open with Israel than it is now or than after the Second Intifada. For example, a couple of times we accessed Gaza through Jordan. So we would travel through Israel and then access through the Erez crossing. And I remember that in my experience being far more pleasant than having to go through the Rafah border crossing. So I'll stop there, but I'll just share one last thing, which is that Gaza, in a weird way, even during the blockade, even during Hamas's control, the contradiction is that it also actually evolved and developed in different ways. Like Gaza's first mall came online in 2010, and a lot of businesses. I mean, Hamas ironically invested in leisure and like retail businesses as both a way to bring about like different sources of revenue, but there were also just economic evolution and economic growth while the blockade was happening.
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing how people can persevere despite, everything that is going on around them. Life prevails, beauty prevails, joy prevails. My dad would go back and forth to Gaza all the time and constantly, he tried to get us to go, always telling us about how beautiful it is there, sharing with us images of, he loved the Debka and he really loved to get involved and watch people dance and sing, and there's a lot of art going on. There's a lot of like theater and music and things like that. So he was always very involved in those kinds of things and trying. He really wished and hoped that Gaza would one day be what it was when he was growing up. And as I've said so many times since October 7th, I'm kind of glad that he never got to see what has become of his homeland today, because he really did hold out hope that one day, Gaza could be free and independent, and he would see men and women living freely and civil liberties and everything.
Well, and that's actually part of like what I've been pushing for, is that people, there is very much so this pervasive narrative, which, so again, multiple things can be true at once. While it is true that there have been numerous Israeli policies that I think have hindered Gaza's prospects, I think the failure to acknowledge the role of people like Hamas in destroying any prospects for Gaza becoming a hub of Palestinian art, culture, economic development. It overlooks the Mediterranean. It can have an amazing seaport for trade.
Yeah.
It can have an airport like it once did. It can have inner kind of commerce with both Egypt and Israel. So what I have been pushing for is, to go beyond just this incessant insistence that only because of Israel, Gaza hasn't reached its full potential. I strongly believe, based on detailed information and analysis and understanding of the history, and having lived there and having family who are not just on the periphery of events, having extended family who are actually involved in all sectors of Gaza society, different decisions could have been made that would have allowed Gaza to be free, prosperous, and developed. And I will also say, just about the point of it's not just economic or political liberties; it's also about social and like
Absolutely.
societal liberties. Gaza,
Yeah.
and I mean, so I come from a Muslim family, a very religious Muslim family. My family is still religious, even though I am not religious. Or and I have all sorts of. I mean, I grew up in Saudi Arabia. I'll tell you a little bit about the. I went to like madrasa tahfidh al-Quran. I went to like religious instruction schools, and it was a deeply traumatic experience. And even nowadays, Saudi has evolved, but Gaza in the 60s and 70s and even early 80s was incredibly open. I mean, yeah, my there are pictures of like my family members and my mom and my aunts and skirts and like dresses and there were bars. There was social liberty, not in just the shallow like let me dress up as I, but there was an actual like multifaceted way in which people conducted themselves, in which there was political diversity, like, and it was truly during the mid 80s with the Mujamma al-Islami, the Islamic complex, where the Muslim Brotherhood started Islamizing the society, where there were the infamous acid attacks, where there was this idea that somehow our problem isn't, you hear this probably, and this is the cliche in the Arab and Muslim world, is, well, our problem is because we departed away from our religion. So by going back to the religion, al-Islam huwa al-hal, Islam is the solution. And again, I say this with all due respect to people who practice the Muslim faith, who practice their beliefs in the way that they see fit. But the political Islamism, as expressed by the early founders of the Muslim Brotherhood, and then as kind of lived and iterated by these Islamist groups, had a deeply detrimental impact on Palestinian society in Gaza in particular. And so that's where Hamas, had its origins, is in, and yes, they did a lot of charities, obviously, like that's
what they
have
do.
built that. They exactly same in Egypt. And so that kind of that time was the foundation, I would say, for a lot of the mess that we find ourselves in terms of a narrowing in political and religious and societal freedoms that has led to the violent extremism as expressed by Hamas contemporarily.
Yeah. That story is so common. That same story could be told, like you said, about Egypt. It could be told about Tunisia. It could be told about Algeria. It could be told about Yemen. Like, it's just it was like this ripple effect. It started with the Iranian Revolution, started with the Islamic regime taking over there, and then it just spread like wildfire throughout the Muslim majority world. These Islamists feeling empowered, like that, like you said, Islam huwa al-hal, you know? But it's not that they really care about Islam or religion or anything like that. These are political opportunists that want to hijack they just use religion as the tool for them to get into political power. And so what they
Absolutely.
did, yeah, and somebody in the comments said Syria, absolutely, Syria as well. And so what they did in Gaza is the same thing that has happened in so many countries around the world. But when people look at Gaza today and they look at the conflict with Israel, it's exactly what you were just saying. Like there's more than one thing can be true at the same time, right? But they just want to blame everything on Israel. Even when I talk about the fact that, you know, Gaza was independent, you know what I mean? Like like you said, better decisions could have been made. You know what I mean? It's easier for us maybe to self-criticize. You know, I think that when you're from there and these are you feel angry, like you feel resentful. I'm just like frustrated, you know, like you were mentioning the beautiful beaches, like there's so much opportunity. This could have been, this could have gone so well, you know, and we really messed this up step by step and then consistently, like kept on going with messing it up. It's not like we just messed it up and then stopped, you know? And it's
And
very frustrating to, and I don't, although I do believe there are many things that are true and there are many reasons and lots of things are true at the same time, but I'm pissed off at our people.
I mean, absolutely. It's spot on. I understand. I mean, again, Israel made decisions as well that contributed to this. I get that. That's indisputable. That's a fact. But
Yeah.
the unwillingness to take any responsibility and accountability, and I hate to say it, you had a beautiful book about it. Some of this, I think, was enabled by supposed allies
Yeah.
and advocates and even analysts who consistently absolved Hamas of any responsibility and made them out to be this organic expression of resistance to injustices, when in fact, Hamas is a nefarious political actor that uses religion, that has held its people effectively hostages. People got mad when I wrote that article for Newsweek about how Hamas effectively used, like there might be Israeli propaganda about the hostage, you know, Hamas using people as hostages, but there's a lot of truth to that, and how people in Gaza will tell you, that we have had no say in how our future is determined, and instead a narrow group based in Qatar, based in Tehran, based in Lebanon are deciding our future for us. And I'll go back to the different priorities and decisions that could have been made. I mean, I was intimately involved in numerous projects, public and behind the scenes, and efforts and discussions with people, including with Israelis and including with people in senior political and military establishments who genuinely wanted to see something different happen in Gaza. And all it would have taken were some decisions by Hamas to commit to a long-term, a 10 to 15-year truce, to commit to releasing the bodies of the dead soldiers that were killed in Gaza in 2014, or the two mentally challenged individuals that walked into Gaza. One was as an African migrant, Mengistu, and then another one is an Arab Bedouin. And Hamas wanted to trade them for thousands of prisoners, when again, there was a willingness, a genuine willingness, and even money on standby by numerous Arab countries to let Gaza become, it might not have been the Paris or Singapore of the Mediterranean, but it could have been a different place. The other thing too is that, and I'm sorry, like these simplistic reductionist views about the victimhood narrative, about the colonizer, the oppressed or oppressors, That's not to say Israel hasn't oppressed Palestinians. It absolutely has. But there is this, Western leftist-led oversimplification of the dynamics. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of well-intentioned allies have worsened the situation and have made, I wrote yesterday on Twitter that diaspora politics are incredibly toxic because there's so, like, more Palestinians in Palestine or in Gaza are much more willing to criticize Hamas and to criticize the failures of the Palestinian political leadership than there's willingness in the West, in the free and open Western society. I can understand to a certain extent, maybe, why people in Gaza might have a hard time criticizing Hamas. After all, it's not safe, it's difficult. There's forced conformity, there's propaganda, there's brainwashing, you're caught up in your daily survival. But what really upsets me deeply are those either Palestinians or their allies in the West who have the safety, have the ability to express their opinions, perpetuating a lot of those simplistic reductionist slogans and views about resistance and about, we are just this perpetual victim that, can do no wrong, all means necessary, international. And there's this belief that international law grants the occupied the right to resistance, but there's this inability to distinguish between what is legitimate versus what is effective versus what is moral versus what is right. So I share your frustration, and that is precisely why I decided to speak out after October 7th, even though it's incredibly uncomfortable. And you know firsthand what people do when you deviate from the established narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to what you were talking about, these Western allies and how they're not helping us. What frustrates me the most right now is seeing them all pretending that they care about Gazans all in the streets with their slogans and their signs. But when the Gazans had the "We Want to Live" campaigns, who gave a fuck about them then? Who paid attention to them then? Nobody. They never cared. They never cared about the Gazans when the Gazans were fighting against Hamas, right? When they were saying, like, look at our unemployment rates, look at our suicide rates, look at all of the, we just want to live. Can you imagine? Like, it was so, to have the slogan of their campaign to be, "We want to live." You just know how desperate things were. And nobody paid attention to them. They got zero media coverage. No one was interested. But now, when it's against Israel, suddenly everybody is really paying attention to them. And that's how you know that this is just so opportunistic. It's not because you care about Gazans, right? It's because you care about hating on Israel the same way that you just wanted to. And this is a nice opportunity. So I want to talk about that because
I'm sorry.
let me ask you this.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Because I'm gonna set the whole stage for you, and then I want you to answer this whole thing for me. So for decades, I think Palestinians have been used as pawns. I just described how they're being used by pawns in the West, and you described before how they're being used pawns by the Islamists who are just trying to, Islam huwa al-hal, trying to have their global caliphate, you know what I mean? So whether it's East or West, they're being used, for different, whatever their purpose is, whatever their goal is, not for what is best for the people of Gaza ever, right? That's not the main, that's not their main goal here. So I want to ask you now, as an authentic voice, as a man from Gaza, what are they getting wrong? What do you want the world to know? And how are you seeing this?
So what I was going to say earlier to your point is, I mean, the protests that we want to live, like they happened in 2019 mainly, but there were also ones in 2017, and they happened in July of 2023, yes. Just like 3 months recent. Before October 7th. So
that's right.
But we don't even have to go back that far. During the war, about 2 months ago, there were protests in Rafah, Deir al-Balah, and Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. Spontaneous at UN refugee centers, where the displaced people just organically just marched with white flags and signs saying, "Stop the war, release the hostages, we want to live, end it." I cannot tell you how disturbing it was to see one of three things. Either people were complete zip, they said nothing, they didn't acknowledge them in the slightest, or worse, people said, oh, these must be paid Israeli agents. These must be, how are they protesting under fire? I mean, so that tells you everything you need to know. Like, oh, listen to the Ghazawis, listen to the Gazans, represent their voice. Well, the Gazans are speaking. They're saying, like, please see, not just like ceasefire in the like the empty slogan. And believe me, half of my family are dead. I want this war to stop right this second. But these empty ceasefire slogans, like, it's like, what does that even mean? Like, ceasefire and release the hostages, ceasefire and return to the status quo, ceasefire and Hamas gets to be back in control of Gazans for another 10 years and you know, waiting for the next war. Look, I've been pushing people to like be specific, pair calls for ceasefires with the release of hostages, actually provide a vision, and most importantly, acknowledge the people in Gaza who want this war to end right now and who are telling you we've had enough, we're done with Hamas, and yet people don't want to acknowledge that. So that's what's so frustrating is there's a lack of unwillingness to condemn Hamas in an organic, self-initiated way, such that we have to wait for Piers Morgan to go on his show and be like, start his show with, do you condemn Hamas or not? And people have a fit when he does that. But so going back to your question to the allies, I mean, I'm not dismissing the authenticity of many people's feelings and thoughts and beliefs. So, I mean, people are horrified. What's taken place is awful. I genuinely don't dismiss the humanity, but behind what motivates a lot of people who are protesting for Gaza. And even though there are absolute opportunists and grifters, I mean, people, you know, look at someone like Jackson Hinkle, who had like 500,000 followers, and now he has 2.5 million followers and has all these subscribers, or that snake doctor from Sweden, or all these other creatures online, or the Islamists in London who are largely irrelevant. All of a sudden, they're, you know, or a certain somebody who just converted to Islam and then the next day he started a fundraiser. Like, it is so clear, abundantly in your face that like the people are riding the Gaza wave to enrich themselves, collect likes and shares, whatever. But that's one group. I don't care about those people. Those people are irredeemable. They mean nothing to me. What I care about is addressing the well-intentioned folks who I genuinely believe are a large number of those who are upset. They might have limited information. They might just be horrified by the constant scenery. And they're also walking in on a war without having understood a lot of the contextual history and politics. It's like, to those well-intentioned folks, I say, please understand how Hamas deliberately sabotaged an imperfect and fragile yet viable Oslo peace process that gave Gazans IDs and a promise of a seaport that was being built and an airport. I flew, can you imagine saying this, just what I'm just saying? I flew into Gaza in 99 and in 2000. I flew into Gaza. Gaza had an airport? What? It gave Palestinians an industrial zone near the Erez zone. Where thousands of people were making. Half of Gaza was built by either money from day laborers or the industrial zone, or the economic prosperity that came about in the 90s. Please understand the leadership failures of even Arafat. I mean, Arafat, Yasser Arafat was super corrupt and super detrimental. He was a disaster for the Palestinians in the 70s in Jordan, and in the 80s in Lebanon, and in the 90s with Kuwait, and standing up, you know, with Saddam against the Kuwaiti people who have hosted Palestinians and financed the Palestinian cause. The only thing that I will say about Arafat, and he made a disastrous decision not to accept the 2000 Camp David peace proposal. He nevertheless made a courageous decision that I think set a good precedent, which is actually recognizing Israel, recognizing its right to exist, ultimately recognizing the futility of armed resistance. Even though He then basically launched the Second Intifada after the Ariel Sharon visit to the Aqsa Mosque in 2000 and September 28th, 2000. I remember I was in Gaza. I remember when we were let go of school and all hell broke loose. And he tried to have a double game towards the end. It was a dirty game and he failed. He basically thought he could control Hamas, and then he thought he could use Hamas to pressure Israel, and Hamas became a monster that grew out of control.
Yep.
Please understand those dynamics. Please understand that Hamas basically helped militarize the Intifada out of Fed, didn't want that. He thought he could use it to extract concessions from the Israelis. Hamas, with their suicide bombings and their terrible violence against Israeli civilians, and the further Islamization of the society, destroyed prospects for peace, for a Palestinian state. How about the 2005 withdrawal of settlements? And I know people are like, well, of course, Israel maintained control of the air and the nearby land. It wasn't as if Gaza all of a sudden became this wholly independent country. Nevertheless, it was a historic opportunity to try and develop Gaza, turn it into a model for successful governance of a future and an incoming Palestinian state, to show that this is what we're capable of. That we are smart, talented, intelligent people. If the West Bank is vacated from settlements, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to build. And instead, Hamas literally, all those open areas, the former they call them liberated settlements, became training grounds for them to increase the range of their missiles, for them to develop mortar shells, for them to develop these IEDs and other militant activities. How about the 2006 elections? I mean, Hamas opposed the Oslo peace process. It was treason. It was cowardly. It was awful. They didn't like it. They called it all sorts of names. They were treacherous, blah, blah, blah. But then it used basically it accessed elections that were built upon the Oslo peace framework that brought about the Palestinian Authority and kind of created this legislative and other Palestinian governance bodies on the Palestinian territories. So Hamas used a political process based upon the very framework, peace framework, and negotiations with Israel and acknowledging Israel, using the very framework that it criticized, thinking it's going to now become a government, while also being a resistance group. So by doing so, Hamas delegitimized the elections. They destroyed, basically, they brought about sanctions on the Palestinian government, and that led to all sorts of quality of life issues. People's salaries couldn't be paid. And then Hamas started basically wanting to entrench its control, and that led to a mini civil war, effectively, with the Palestinian Authority and Fatah, leading to the 2007 takeover. And then the 2008 war and the 2014 war, which, like, I can go on and on, but please, to those good people who love the Palestinian people, fine, like, criticize Israel all you want, but you cannot honestly and sincerely support the Palestinian people without not only condemning Hamas and even the Palestinian Authority with their own failures, which we can talk about later. It is disingenuous and dishonest to keep the focus on Israel and to absolve Hamas of its mass responsibility for the death of Gazans, for the destruction. I mean, how many times is the international community going to keep pumping billions of dollars into Gaza to rebuild it, only for Hamas to drag people along suicidal adventures, like, and turning Gazans into aid-dependent people? I mean, we're smart, talented, intelligent, capable people. We do not need to live off of UNRWA for the rest of our lives. We do not need the Western world or the Arab world to give us food handouts. We can survive on our own if given good leadership and an opportunity to not have war. So, like, that's what I encourage people to think about, is criticizing Hamas isn't just the moral and right thing to do. Exposing them and helping, like, giving a hand up to the Palestinian people and voices that want a different future, that is actually how you could be most effective and helpful for the Palestinian people. Because let me tell you something, Israel isn't going anywhere, okay? Israel is not South Africa. There is no dismantling. I want to see the end of the occupation, the military occupation of the West Bank. I want to see equal rights for the Palestinian people. I want to see peaceful coexistence, even though that's going to happen in phases. I want to see access to Jerusalem and equal distribution of resources. Nevertheless, Israel is here to stay. You cannot delegitimize Israel just by hoping that, which is Hamas's strategy. It's hoping that Israel kills enough. The more Israel, Hamas thinks, kills Palestinians, the more there's a chance to delegitimize Israel and to embark upon the South Africa model. And that's not going to happen. So please, please recognize, and I'll conclude with this, please recognize that you're not betraying the Palestinian people by condemning Hamas and understanding just how destructive they are. You are genuinely helping them. You are sincerely empowering voices in Gaza that don't have the safety you have in the West to think freely, to see things from a distance, to openly, address the facts on the ground. And that's what I'm hoping with by speaking out. I'm not just building, this is uncomfortable, but I genuinely think we have a responsibility in the Western world and the allies. I think we have a moral and a karmic duty to help those Palestinian voices.
Beautiful. 100% agree with you. I find it so condescending how they always want to paint Gazan people as these little victims that can't do anything on their own. And Palestinians are throughout the world. I mean, you just talked about your own family and how they're all in the medical field, they're all doctors and you're not. And so they're oh, how could you enter business or any other field other than medicine? Do you know what I mean? Palestinians are capable people everywhere on the planet. Why can't they be capable in their homeland? But they have this impression, they have this idea of them now as these little victims that of course they're going to start raping Israeli women and killing Israeli babies. What else are they going to do? They had no other options. How dare you talk about people like that? How dare you? My father's biggest thing that he would always say, I mean, is he would swear at Hamas, and then curse them, and then be angry at the fact that they were the face of Gaza. When you said Gaza, it was like synonymous with Hamas. That hurt him so much. Like your homeland that you love so much is synonymous with these terrorists. And then they're being uplifted. That is, like you said, that's the subtitle of my book, How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. They are being uplifted by these people here in the West. They are uplifting the people that, they have been terrorizing the people of Gaza for all of these years. And now they've just expanded their terrorism into Israel. And people are wanting to say that they're freedom fighters and they're resistance and they're this and that. It's like, they have always been terrorists. You know what I mean? Don't try and paint them into something else that they never were and that they never will be. Everything that you said is absolutely true. And I would add to that too, that it's not even just this conflict, but people need to take a step back too and see how this is happening all over the world, all over the Middle East and North Africa. This isn't just Israel and Hamas. This isn't, a little, this is just a microcosm of the larger problem. Why is Iran funding Hamas? Right? Why? What is the connection here? Because it's all related, because these are all these Islamist groups that are all wanting to create this global caliphate, and people don't want to see that. Like you said, they just want to simplify it into a really easy oppressor, oppressed, victim and oppressor, and then that's it. Right? And it is dehumanizing, honestly. It's dehumanizing for the Gazan people to constantly be talking about them like that. And it's condescending. Now, I want to talk about something that you were involved in and something that I was really glad to see that you were able to bring to fruition. You were one of the first people to start talking about the humanitarian drops, this idea of dropping the humanitarian aid directly to the people of Gaza, basically circumventing Hamas, who were, in the beginning, of course, the aid was, what do you do with the aid? You give it to the leaders, and then it's the leaders' responsibility to disseminate it amongst the people, but they weren't disseminating anything, they were selling it. They were selling things that have big, huge labels on them that say "not for sale."
Exactly.
And they're selling it. So they're basically, as they've always been doing, they're just opportunists taking advantage of the Gazan people. They never cared about them. So these humanitarian drops would reach people directly, and of course there was, some setbacks. There were some devastating results. There were some parachutes that didn't open, and some things like that. But, all in all, I think it's been a very positive thing. I want to talk about that though, because there's so much conflicting information, and I'm starting to get confused. So my first question is Israel blocking any humanitarian aid to get to the Gazan people? That's my first question. My second question is, why am I seeing videos of Gazans showing us their shawarma and saying, we have all this great food, we don't need your dry ramen noodles that you're dropping from the sky? Like what's going on here? I'm seeing people that are supposedly eating grass, and then other people are saying, no, it's molokhia. I saw trucks of Egyptian truckers, their trucks being destroyed and the drivers being attacked. Talk to me about this whole airdrop thing, and that whole humanitarian aid scenario. What's going on there?
So there's a lot there, but I'll try to be concise about every one of those points you raised. Number one is multiple things, again, are true at once. There is Israeli red tape. There are obstacles that have hindered the free and uninterrupted flow of aid. There's also the fact that Israel is, in fact, allowing a lot of aid. Like those protesters you see on the Israeli side, they've worked in blocking some aid trucks, but for the most part, aid continues to flow in. There's also something that's uncomfortable that people don't want to acknowledge, which is that, Israel is effectively at war with Gaza. They say there were war with Hamas, but really it's a war with this region. And Israel isn't during a war that it's trying to basically pressure Hamas into releasing the hostages and kind of stepping back from its stated goal of continued armed resistance and continued attacks, and we're going to rearm it. Like I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's more, but like it's almost understandable like why Israel isn't going to be the main tap for aid coming into the Gaza Strip. The international community had to scramble after October 7th, when Israel shut off all the aid that was coming in almost exclusively through the Kerem Shalom crossing, to now funnel it through Egypt, but then having to do the inspection. And by the way, to be clear, I am for inspecting aid. I don't want a single piece of weaponry or munitions. Like, I am Mr. Security. I have a degree in international and national security and intelligence. Like, I know how this stuff works. Like, I am absolutely not opposed to security measures, but there's very much so a bureaucratic process involved that does delay a lot of aid going in. There's also damaged infrastructure. There's also fees. There's also Hamas's theft of aid that was so chronic. Hamas doesn't also just steal aid by grabbing it off of trucks coming in. They have a whole set of schemes whereby sometimes they'll hoard it in certain warehouses. Sometimes they'll go to warehouses at night and siphon it off. Sometimes they have some of their own people acting as civilians, and then they go in and loot the trucks. Sometimes for those armed guys that you see on top of trucks, these are on top of vehicles bringing in aid. These are Hamas policemen who haven't been paid for months. So they come up with these schemes with truck drivers or with humanitarian NGOs to say, all right, well, we'll protect some of your trucks, but you're going to give me some of this aid. And then they'll take some of this aid, they'll sell it, they'll bring it back to the Hamas fighters. There's a whole network of schemes that, people aren't going to understand on TikToks or 280 characters in Twitter. That said, the airdrops were meant to bypass Hamas, bypass the damaged infrastructure, to avoid the concentration of people being in a singular location. We've seen these apocalyptic scenes of one or two trucks comes in and it's just swarmed
Yes.
by thousands of people. And the idea is when you do disperse airdrops, you reduce the likelihood of these crazy, stampedes or these dehumanizing scenes. That's what they are. These dehumanizing scenes of desperate civilians, mainly and especially in the north. So there are absolutely hunger and famine-like conditions in parts of the north, which is cut off, by a long, call it belt, if you will, of Israeli ground troops from the rest of Gaza. The south is where most of the aid, that like 99% of the aid comes in. So again, multiple things are also true. There are markets in Gaza. There are some places that have some shawarma. They have some food in the south. But that doesn't mean that hunger and crises don't exist in the north. There's also food, but who can afford it? Because everything now is 100x more expensive. So what has been, hundreds of people have been killed trying to access aid, trying to access some of the food in the north in particular. But 5 people lose their lives tragically through a malfunctioning parachute. And the whole world is like, oh my God, these airdrops are the worst thing. What has been incredibly frustrating are these, and I call them today, and I've been holding back because NGOs do important work. We need their help. But there's absolutely an entrenched NGO industrial complex that some of whom have actually worked with Hamas in the past and almost normalized working with Hamas instead of exposing Hamas and just engaging them with the bare minimum to get things done. And instead, now they had open meetings and working relationships with Hamas and allowed Hamas to absolve itself from providing for its people and allowed Hamas to turn Gaza into aid-dependent subjects and aid-reliant people when Hamas should have been making different choices so that there's no blockade, so that there's true economic development. So the aid drops are helpful. They're a drop in the bucket. I get that. I never said they're a permanent solution, but they were meant to augment inadequate distribution and delivery. Hamas hates airdrops. They despise it. And I have numerous sources. I'm not going to point you to like a singular statement where Hamas said, Hamas has said, oh, these are inadequate. We don't think they're enough, whatever. But behind the scenes, on the ground, etc., Hamas not only hates them, they've unleashed their cyber warriors to do the disgusting things of throwing the aid in the garbage, to say, oh, we don't need you, to make it seem like Gazans are ungrateful because Hamas can't make money off of airdropped aid. It's not enough for them to steal it and to control it. So there's this bizarre, unspoken alliance. It's not, and I don't mean they are literally an alliance, but it's a de facto alliance between Hamas not wanting aid because they can't steal it, they can't tax it, they can't distribute it to their people. Hamas can't be everywhere at once. They can't grab the food from everybody's hands when it lands. And NGOs, who some of whom are well-meaning, whatever, but some of whom they're like, well, we want to be part of the distribution. We want to be in on that. They don't also want the aid, and they think it's political stunts and blah, blah, blah. It's been so frustrating because you know what? Tens of thousands of Gazans have benefited from these airdrops. So don't sit here in your Western capital and tell me, well, this is not enough. All right, fine, it's not enough, but
it's something.
Ceasefire, it's something, but they're like, well, we want a ceasefire. This goes back to the useless, like, all right, well, you're just going to call for a ceasefire. Like, what does that even mean? Like, I want a ceasefire, but Hamas keeps rejecting a ceasefire. Hamas keeps rejecting any proposals to release the hostages. I mean, and we're talking about releasing women and elderly and injured Israelis. But okay, going back to the main theme to keep in mind is we need to flood Gaza with aid through land, through sea, through the air. The diversification of delivery not only helps more aid from a quantity point of view, but it also ensures that you don't have this concentrated stream that is easy to pilfer, steal, and loot by Hamas or criminal gangs. The unfortunate thing with the Egyptian truck drivers, the tragedy, and I have a brother who's involved in a lot of the humanitarian delivery networks, and I have many friends who are involved in that world in Gaza right now, and they suffer immensely from their convoys, their trucks being pelted by stones, being attacked, being looted. And there's basically, it's one of three things. Either there are cases
Hamas
of desperate,
supporters.
that's one of them. There are genuine desperate people that genuinely are angry. They hear about aid coming in, but they see nothing, and they are genuinely desperate. So it's this instinctive survival, like it's like a do or die. That's one group. Definitely Hamas members that are dressed up as civilians and acting as civilians, or Hamas networks of thieves and spies that are basically scouting out the convoys. They tend to not loot a lot of the medical supplies. They mainly focus on food because Hamas imposes, they steal that stuff, they sell it, they impose taxes on aid. Or there are, unfortunately, criminal gangs. As in any war zone, there are criminal gangs that are opportunistic, and they want to get aid because now it's currency, because there's no cash. There's very limited cash that's in circulation, so people barter with it. And it's tragic and it's horrible, and I've condemned it. And there are many Gazans who are appalled by the attacks on these trucks. They think they're shameful. They think they're disgusting. They think, how could you attack the hand that's feeding us, the guy that's bringing it to us? So unfortunately, there is dehumanization of the Palestinian people. It's understandable why people will look at some of these images and be like, oh, there's no famine, they're eating shawarma, or, oh, they're pelting stones at these trucks. So like multiple realities are true. Just to conclude, there's a serious hunger crisis in the north. There are those who would actually genuinely rather see Palestinians starve and hungry so that they could keep attacking Israel and blaming Israel for everything, and they don't want any solution. And finally, airdrops. I am absolutely proud of my work on airdrops, even as some have tried to say, I have blood on my hand for those 5 people that were killed. How dare you, dude? Like, what are you doing? What have you done for the people of Gaza? In the Quran, okay? I'm going to bring it from the Quran. It says, وَمَنْ أَحْيَاهَا فَكَأَنَّمَا أَحْيَا النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا. If you basically help, a life, if you save one life, it's as if you saved the entirety of humanity. That's my ethos. Is I would much rather a few thousand Palestinians get some aid than to sit back and say, oh, well, Israel isn't letting aid, so Israel bad, starve, die, Gazans, so that I can use you as props in my protest or my social media posts. And I'm sorry for going on and on, but as you can tell, this issue, for me, I have been so frustrated. Why is it controversial to get food to Gazans through a stupid plane or through a boat? Like, why is
it's not, Ahmed, it's not. The people that are saying these kinds of things have a specific objective. They have a nefarious narrative that they're sticking to. Of course your aim was to help people, but you can't allow perfection to be, enemy of the good. You have to move forward and do what you can to help as many people as you possibly can. And shit happens all the time, but your aim was to do good, right? That was your goal. And that's the goal of, all the countries that have been involved in this, right? There's France, US, Finland, I can't remember all the names, but there's lots of countries all over the world that have been involved in this. And it's obviously because they wanted to do good as well, not because they wanted to hurt anybody, but accidents happen. And, you absolutely should not be feeling like you need to be responding to those kinds of people because they are not speaking from a place of honesty at all. So that they're not even worth your time. So I absolutely commend your work in the humanitarian airdrops. I think I was very impressed. I think you did a great job. I'm very grateful that you're doing that. And I'm very grateful that so many countries are getting involved and people are being helped. Thank you so much for giving us so much insight, for giving us so many, there are so many perspectives and all of the perspectives are true all at the same time. And so it's really helpful. You know, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm not just interviewing anybody right now. I'm interviewing a man who's born and raised in Gaza, who's had family members killed in Gaza because of this, you know, current war that's going on since October 7th. You know, this is very real for you. This is very emotional. This isn't just an intellectual exercise. A lot of people just like log into Twitter, you know, retweet their stupid little things and then they go back to their lives. You know what I mean? You don't have the luxury of doing that. This is your life. That, you know, when people are just seeing numbers of people that have died, for you, you're seeing my uncle, my niece, you know what I mean? Like this is, I'm very grateful that you are willing to have these conversations publicly and that you're, you know, to be honest, I'm in awe. I'm quite impressed that you're able to take a step back and to still see things with such a clear, rational eye. You know, whenever I read your tweets, I'm always feeling like, I don't know where you get the, you know, where you get the strength to do that, to take that, you know, emotional distance. You were sharing a picture between you and a man who also lost family on October 7th. So both of you have lost family on two opposite sides of this conflict, and you're coming together to work towards peace. And my God, if that isn't like the best of humanity, the two of you, you know? And so I'm very grateful to know you. I'm very grateful that you're here speaking with us today. And I really don't want you to pay any attention to all of those shitheads because you're doing great work. And we're all very proud of you and all very grateful for you. Now,
Thank you,
I'm going to
Yasmine.
bring
Thank
this.
you for the kind words. I appreciate it. And I am also in awe of your courage and all that you have done over the years. And, you know, I do feel it, like you said, you said it best just real quickly, that this is not an intellectual exercise. This is not a Twitter exercise. This is life and death. This is a karmic responsibility to share desperately needed and sorely lacking voices and perspectives from Gaza. I speak for myself. I've never claimed to speak on behalf of anyone else.
Of course.
But what is an indisputable fact is that a lot of what I express are different pieces of what I express are absolutely sentiments that are held by people in Gaza, people in the United States. I was talking to a Muslim hijabi woman the other day. She's a doctor in Southern California. And she was saying, thank you so much for speaking out. I love what you're saying. Every time I try to say anything against Hamas, I'm a 39-year-old independent woman making a ton of money in the United States. My family go crazy, and I feel like it's genuinely no longer okay or safe for me to speak out. So like this is absolutely horrible what's happening, and someone has to, you know, it's like the three words that I use is I engage, I attempt to convince, or I confront. Sometimes you have to confront people's beliefs and misperceptions and those awful, you know, ideologies and thoughts. So thank you, Yasmine.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now I'm going to ask you a very big question. Do you still believe that any kind of peaceful two-state solution is possible? Or how can we move forward from where we are now with both Gazans and Israelis feeling safe, first and foremost, and recognizing each other's humanity? How do you, in a perfect world, how would you see things play out from this point forward?
Well, I mean, I very much so believe in a two-state solution. I believe that both people should have the right to exist on the land. I think the fact that the two-state solution now is exceptionally difficult, not just because of what's happening in Gaza, but also the settlements in the West Bank, which many Israelis are against, and like that is a whole set of injustice. But I absolutely think that peace is ultimately going to be inevitable, because unlike what a lot of these crazy Islamists think, which is actually ironically similar to some of the messianic voices on the right in Christianity and even in Judaism, like there are many Muslim voices that believe in Armageddon and believe in the end of times is going to happen on the land, and I don't believe that people in Gaza are willing to be pawns in that despicable game anymore. I genuinely think this is going to be Gaza's last war. I think this is the worst thing that has ever happened to Gaza in modern times. Some would even argue worse than the battles that took place between the Ottoman Empire and the United Kingdom during World War I in 1917 when Gaza was taken over. I see a fundamental shift. That's not to say it has. I mean, Gazans are traumatized. They're hopeless. They're hungry. Like they're in survival mode right now. So like it's gonna take some time. But I see a genuine seed for the potential long-term stability in which, even if people don't explicitly condemn Hamas or speak out against Hamas, like people don't want war. People don't want to be part of the Iranian-led axis of resistance. People don't want Iranians and Iraqi militias and Hezbollah in Lebanon making decisions on their behalf. They don't want Qatar negotiating on their behalf long-term. And so that's step one, is I genuinely feel it, I see it, I hear it. And it's one of those like difficult to capture. It's not always tangible. It's sentiments. It's how it's nuanced language and Arabic. Like there's just a lot of sentiments that's what I'm basing the aforementioned on. So that's number one. Number two is I do think, unfortunately, as is the case in a lot of things in the world, like this horrible violence is bringing about renewed attention to this issue. I'm not talking about the college campuses and the protests and whatever. That's its own. I'm talking about like political interests, including the regional political interests, the United States, the Europeans. Like there is renewed interest that could, I don't know how as of this moment. I am involved in some behind the scenes talks, but it's not entirely clear how it's going to do. But there are talks about, all right, like let's actually do something to stabilize Gaza, to maybe launch a roadmap that could address what's happening in the West Bank through land swaps, through a 5-year ceasefire, or let's just pause violence in the West Bank. Let's rein in the settlers. I agree with sanctions against the settlers. Some of them are incredibly violent and detrimental to peace. So there's that front. And there are some behind the scenes efforts that I'm also involved in. We're not yet ready to come out fully publicly, but there are efforts to bolster bottom-up peace efforts, grassroots levels, by investing in already existing organizations that are fragmented and kind of poorly resourced to help elevate their voices, but to also create a loose coalition of Palestinian and Israeli groups that are engaged in the long-term kind of propagation of peace values and demonstration of the need for reconciliation, but also saying, yes, there are injustices that need to be addressed, but neither people are going anywhere. So short term, I think the picture is very bleak, very bleak. I'm going to be very honest with you, because the biggest problem right now is it's not clear what could take Hamas's place in Gaza. And worse, I and several analysts and experts think that there's a good chance Hamas will survive this war. I mean, they'll survive as an ideology, they'll survive as a group. They may not survive as a full administrative body in charge of Gaza, but they will nevertheless survive. So can Hamas, and I've written a piece for the Atlantic Council about this, like I'm a pragmatist as well, can what remains of Hamas be politically or administratively rehabilitated? We've seen that with the IRA. We've seen that with the FARC rebels. We've seen that even with the elements of the PLO after they were violent and then they renounced violence and they agreed to the Oslo peace process. It was imperfect, but there are examples in different parts of the world where once violent groups evolve and change. Nevertheless, I genuinely believe that this is very likely going to be Gaza's last war, at least the last one in a long time, even though there's the risk, and this is where the Israeli government has made a horrible mistake by not having serious day after plans, including even bringing some elements of the Palestinian Authority to fill the vacuum created by getting rid of Hamas and Gaza, because that vacuum is so dangerous. We've seen in Syria and Iraq, we've seen in Libya what happened, we've seen in Mali, we've seen in the Sahel region with Burkina Faso and all these other countries, and Niger. When you have a vacuum, sadly, in our part of the world, it is usually filled by nefarious players, and sadly, they tend to be Islamic extremists or Islamists or outright like terrorists like ISIS and like Al-Qaeda. So that's what concerns me in the short term. Medium term and long term, I actually am far more optimistic. And let's finally just address the other obstacle, I think, to the true potential for the Palestinian people, and that is Abbas and the old guard senior leadership in the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. I mean, they are just as much of an obstacle to new Palestinian blood coming into the picture that want to govern effectively, that want to develop their people, that and that want to try something else that hasn't been tried. I mean, Abbas walked away from an incredibly viable proposal in 2008 by Omer. Whether or not that proposal could have been fully implemented remains to be seen, but at least there was a viable, basically two-state solution that would have entailed most of the West Bank settlements being vacated, some territorial swaps, symbolic return of the right of the refugees, which I actually want to say something about. Like, people attack me viciously when I say, I'm sorry, but there's millions of Palestinian refugees are not going back. There's no right of return, as we've been lied to for decades. The right of return, as I believe it, absolutely should take place in the West Bank and Gaza. Let's develop the Palestinian territories. Let's make them viable places that people who are living in actual apartheid in Lebanon, actual apartheid, the Palestinian refugees, they want to come back, exactly. And or given an option to settle in their countries. So, but Abbas and the old guard and the Palestinian Authority are just as much of an obstacle to true peace and coexistence as Hamas is.
Absolutely. You mentioned a little bit about actual apartheid in Lebanon, and that was one of the questions, one of the many questions on my list here of questions for you that I've had to forego, unfortunately, because of our time. And I want to give everyone a chance who's joined us here today to be able to ask their questions or to pose their comments to you. I'm sure it's been very difficult for you to keep track of everything that's going on in the chat as well as speaking with us. But I'm going to open it up to the group. I asked you all to turn off your videos because the connection was bad, but you can turn on your videos now. And go ahead and click on the little hand icon, and you can start asking Ahmed your questions. Alnaz, I noticed you had your hand up, so why don't you start us off?
Hello, thanks Yasmine for organizing this. Thank you, Ahmed, for sharing everything, for all you have done, for speaking out, and for bringing our attention to the larger broader trend that's going on in terms of like what Islamists have done to the Middle East. I'm Iranian, so I'm very familiar to this issue. It's really dear to my heart, and I lived in Iran for 20 years, firsthand experienced this. And what I wanted to ask you is related to Hamas. As an Iranian, we know that the Iranian government is not letting go of Iranian people. They are hostage at their hands. A recent polling shows that 80% of Iranians are against this government, and yet there's, the protests are heavily oppressed. Iranian people kill because they don't kill about Iranian people, they kill about Islam. And from what I've gathered, that's true for Hamas as well. So my question is is Hamas gonna let go of Palestinian people? And the other question, which is, I think this is a propaganda issue is like how popular Hamas actually is with Palestinian people. I remember there was I'm not sure how true it is, there's a video of Israeli hostage saying, I was actually in Palestinian peoples, kind of implying that Palestinians work closely with Hamas. So for me, I want someone with an inside view to kind of open up that how popular Hamas actually is with Palestinians. And thank you so much.
Certainly. And Yasmine, I should answer now, or yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead. Yep, this is
okay.
table's yours.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, I've spoken out against a lot of those polls that show overwhelming support for Hamas, and my intention isn't to manufacture a dissent where none exists, and I'm not trying to kind of obscure the fact that absolutely Hamas has support in Gaza. I mean, and it's a multi-tiered. There are multiple reasons, multiple layers. Kind of think of it as an onion with a core and then layers up to. There are ideological supporters of Hamas, and then there are kind of Hamas has created a network of patrons and affiliates and beneficiaries who either get access to jobs or to money or to social services or to aid. Then there are people that just need to get business done or need to get things done, whether they're business people or organizations or whatever. So they have to kind of kiss up to Hamas and work with Hamas. And one thing to remember is, for example, the Ba'ath Party in Iraq, when you have a system, a place where basically you have one dominant party or government in place, to survive in such an environment, you really have to kiss up to the existing regime. And I'm not I'm simply delivering what is happening. You know, like people have to kiss up to Hamas in order to either win favors or to be left alone. And then there are others that are apathetic, that think this is never going to be solved, it doesn't make a difference, so I might as well like go along with the program. And then there are others, and this is actually a key point, the concept of resistance, muqawama, kind of capital R resistance, enjoys widespread support among Palestinians, including those who may actually not support armed resistance. But the idea is that it is a common belief among most Palestinians that we've been subjected to occupation and injustices and etc., and that like we have the right to resist the occupation. Now, what Hamas has nefariously done is it not only hides behind the resistance narrative, it has made itself linguistically, politically, and de facto synonymous with resistance. So it turned itself from this Islamist brotherhood-inspired organization to we are the resistance. And then they positioned themselves and they said, oh, those stinky Fatah guys or PLO guys, oh, no, they're cowardly peace. Oh, no, peace is treacherous and treasonous, but we are the resistance. So people support Hamas not as Hamas, the oppressive, violent, disgusting Islamist group, but believing that this is the form of resistance or that this is an expression of resistance. And again, due to people's lived experience, due to brainwashing, due to propaganda, due to isolation, some people are able to both hate Hamas while also supporting its resistance. A lot of people in Gaza right now are, I mean, I promise you with all my heart, if you've lost family members, if you're standing in line for a disgusting public bathroom with 200 people and you have to wait an hour to take a leak, or if you're in a crowded, a tent city in a wet, muddy, cold space, you're not sitting there and saying like, gee, October 7th was so brilliant. Gee, Hamas did us right. Gee, like we've liberated. I mean, Hamas in its ceasefire proposal to Israel and its counter ceasefire proposal wants Israel to pull back from Shara Rashid Street on the coast and Salah ad-Din Street from the center of Gaza. Basically, instead of liberating Jerusalem or liberating the Aqsa or liberating territories, Hamas is literally now, and Gazans are mocking them, Hamas is literally now just wanting to liberate 2 small streets in Gaza. Okay, you're not sitting there saying like, wow, Hamas is so, like, people are not stupid, okay? People,
especially when they see them as billionaires in Qatar with their private jets too.
like they go to negotiate in Cairo on behalf of Gazans, and then they go back to Lebanon and Qatar and Iran and whatever. So is that sentiment, but that sentiment, nevertheless, particularly in times of war, and is difficult to capture. And we in the Western world, and I'm not saying Western to be like hipster, like I consider myself a Westerner, but like there is this Western obsession with like capturing public sentiments through polls and quantifying the information. We live in a democratic society here in the United States, and yet we got the 2016 election wrong. All the pollsters were wrong. So imagine doing that in an undemocratic society with a tiny sample size, with all sorts of societal challenges. And then finally, I mean, when a lot of people, when you do face-to-face polling, people, and you ask people like, what do you think of Hamas? A lot of people in the back of their head, they're thinking, wow, like I wonder if this is an Israeli informant or a Hamas spy person. So again, just take those polls with a grain of salt. Yes, Hamas has and will always have ideological supporters that I call the irredeemables. But when we're talking about people at large, even people who historically have supported Hamas, I'm telling you, they're turning against the group in droves. Sadly, at the same time that Hamas and its violence is being normalized in Western audiences and being celebrated as legitimate resistance. It's the height of irony that actual Gazans are turning against Hamas, but these Western allies are refusing to condemn it and celebrating them as resistance.
Beautiful.
Sorry, do you mind answering the first part too? Do you think Hamas will let go of Israeli Palestinian people?
I mean, I honestly don't even know fully what that means. I mean, I think Hamas is not gonna let go of power. I mean, power never gives itself up. So like, I don't see a scenario in which Hamas just retreats and says, okay, khalas, we're done. Like, here's Gaza. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. But I also think that it's not just what Hamas wants to do. I mean, and that's where, I mean, unfortunately, Iran and Qatar have been incredibly detrimental. Iran with financial support and military support, but also Qatar in enabling Hamas to continue its grip on power. So until those two backers are fundamentally challenged or undermined, Hamas will wield some type of power or control over the political scene. Whether or not that translates to administrative control of Gaza, that remains to be seen. I don't think Hamas is capable of going back to governance in a pre-October manner, even though they may exert some control after the war. The Somalia scenario worries me tremendously, that Gaza is going to become fragmented with Hamas in some parts and clans in others and the Israeli military in others. And I think that could be incredibly disastrous.
But thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Tochi, you're next.
Hey, Yasmine, thanks for setting this up. This is fantastic. Ahmed, what's up, man? I love what you're saying. And to your point about the polls, I really appreciate you bringing this up because I looked at those, I think it was the Arab World Research and Development polls when they came out, and it really kind of put things in perspective where I was like, oh, like clearly the Palestinians are the problem here. But I think you rightly pointed out that, polling in itself, as we all know, is an imperfect science. And especially in a situation like that is so dire, you can't exactly take those results at face value and just assume that everything is correct about them. So I do have two questions. My first question I would love to ask is, when it comes to the radicalization issue, how much of Palestinian society do you consider to be, let's say, radicalized?
Super quick comment about your first point with regards to the polling. I mean, there was the poll that came out in November. It had 260 something Gazans that responded to the. I mean, for goodness sake, like I don't care how much of a statistical significance. Like, I'm sorry, I dispute wholeheartedly the relevance of a sample that was also at the time there was no war in the South. They asked people in the South, not people in the North. So like, I wholeheartedly refuse the premise of of those polls. But from a statistical sample size, I don't care, So to your point, I mean, yes, Hamas ruling Gaza for 17, 18 years, that is good, and all, not just their rule, but their ascent to power. And I was there when that was happening. I mean, I remember their influence in mosques, the mosque close to my family's house. I remember vividly the how, for example, the Friday prayer sermons, they would, it started injecting their people into the Ministry of Religious Affairs. And then the Friday sermons, you could tell who was the preacher that was like a regular dude versus who was the dude that was like a Hamas dude. The way they would do use Ramadan, for example, and to like do sahurs, to do these like, iftars and sahurs, to do these meals, and they bring food, and then they get people together, and then they put pictures of operations, amaliyat, operations that Hamas would do against the Israeli targets. So there's been a gradual kind of the glorification of armed resistance, the rejection of peace, the idea that armed resistance is the only way to liberate all of Palestine, and that any attempt to accept Jewish or Israeli or Zionist, as they say, presence on on historic Palestine is anathema to what Islam wants us to do. It's like that has been a trend even before Hamas's electoral victory in 2006 and Hamas's takeover in 2007. And then they took over, and then that trend was just accelerated. I mean, when the resistance group became a government, they had free reign, they had all the institutions under their control, they had all the territories, they had all the liberties. There is no challenge. They ruled with an iron grip. Nobody could criticize, nobody could say anything. So yes, a lot of people are, you can say, radicalized. A lot of people are, but even within the radicalization realm, that is tiered. It is not entirely like all quote unquote radicalized people aren't, a singular monolithic group. Like I said, some are genuinely motivated by ideology. Some think that they're being pious, good Muslims. Some think they're being patriots. Hamas has also learned over the years. Before, do you know that Hamas leaders, Mahmoud al-Zahar, explicitly said, like almost 20 years ago, that the flag of Palestine means nothing to us. Like, this is a relic of the. No, we have the Islamist flag. This is the relic of the British. It means nothing. And then Hamas, to further entrench itself in the Palestinian narrative and further spread its radicalization, I should say further normalize its radicalization, injected nationalistic elements into its messaging. So look it up, Google it. You see a lot of the Qassam Brigade fighters now, they wear patches. Well, when they actually went on these parades and stuff, now they fight like cowards. They fight in civilian clothes. But when they wore their military uniforms, all the elite Hamas soldiers started wearing flags of Palestine patches on their chests, because Hamas is saying we are the Palestinian army. Hamas moved from only using the Hamas flag and official government posts and whatever to always having the Hamas flag and the Palestinian flag. So there is radicalization, but it's multi-tiered. It's religious, it's ideologically based, it's nationalism based. And there are also people that are genuinely feeling powerless. They feel that they see what happens in the West Bank with the settlers running amok with full protection of the Israeli military. They think that non-violence in the West Bank has gotten us occupation, and they feel that, well, then yeah, of course, like we have to believe in armed resistance, that Hamas is the only alternative. What a lot of people overlook is the fact that the Palestinian Authority and the West Bank is largely non-violent, but they're not engaged in organized, systematic, non-violent resistance. That is entirely different. The Palestinian Authority is largely invested in kind of preserving their power, preserving their control, maintaining their seats. A lot of them have fancy Audis and BMWs paid for by European aid, thank you very much, and some Palestinian taxes. But so that's the problem with the PA, is that they have not successfully, like Abu Mazen, Abbas famously said, to his people, please go out and do nonviolent resistance. It was one of the most pathetic things he ever said, because he, instead of actually leading people or directing them to specifics of here's how we're going to do nonviolent resistance, he's like, Min shan Allah, like for the love of God, please go and do nonviolent resistance. So in the absence of a viable alternative to Hamas in the West Bank, unfortunately, the radicalization is going to take some time to reverse and undo.
Yeah, can I just add to that? I grew up in Saudi. My best friend in high school was Palestinian, actually. So, and I remember he said something to me because I heard, I would say, the Palestinian perspective very much more so, obviously growing up in Saudi. I remember at one point he basically said to me, he was talking about how like he would kill Jews, like because Jews are evil, all this stuff. And so I said, well, what if I was Jewish? And the reason I even said this was because now I'm Igbo. I'm a particular tribe in Nigeria, and we have the Igbos essentially, some of them think that they may in fact be a lost tribe of Jews and things like that. So there's a possibility that I may in fact be Jewish. I don't necessarily claim it, but the point is, I asked him, you know, we've been friends now for years. And he was like, well, I'd kill you too.
Oh.
And this is before Hamas. This is 2000 and I think this is around the second Intifada, maybe 2001 or something like that. And so this is, you know, my boy. We're very close. I know his family. He knows my family. And so he says something like that. And I'm thinking to myself, especially as time has gone on, like, just how much of this society is actually deeply believes that Jews, Israelis should not even be there, that kind of thing. And I guess, is it a large percentage? Is it like 70%? Is it 90%? Because I understand the polls are not accurate, and I'm willing to give you your point on that, and it's very fair, your criticisms. But from the outsider looking in, it just seems like the vast majority of Palestinians have a cultural problem where they just want to essentially destroy and kill all Jews. And obviously, if they do feel that way, then there's nothing the Israelis can do, really, in the grand scheme of things. Nothing will placate them. And I just want to understand how, you know, from someone on the ground who knows more than I do, like, is it fair to say that the vast majority have this issue, or is it just like a couple of people have this issue and the rest are silent and kind of could go either way depending on who's in power? Like, I'm just really curious about this.
Certainly, and absolutely, like I said, my intention has never been to either manufacture dissent where none exists or to obscure uncomfortable, real, like unpleasant dynamics. That said, I will tell you that definitely not the case that the vast majority of Palestinians believe this way. And I'll tell you why. I mean, before October 7th, a lot of Gazans, like I would say half of Gazans, top aspirations ultimately were to get a work permit to go work in Israel, or to get treatment permits for their grandparents, sick parents, and whatever. And that included my dad, who received treatment in Israel before he passed away from cancer. So what I will say is that a lot of the Arab, I mean, the problem is that so many people who are genuinely anti-Semitic and hate Jews and want to kill Jews, they've never met a Jewish person themselves in the Arab world. Most of the Arab world, like, you know, because during the pan-Arabism of Nasser in the 50s and 60s, not only inflamed anti-Semitism and resulted in the expulsion of many Jews from Arab countries to Israel or elsewhere, but it also created this cultural barrier to understanding that Jews have been an integral part of the Middle East for centuries, and that this idea of this simplistic, like, Jews bad, Jews kill Palestinians, Jews are worthy targets, that unfortunately has been an attitude among many Arabs because they've never interacted with Jews. But Palestinians, ironically, have actually had far more interactions with Jews and Israelis. Not all of them are positive. To many Gazans, for example, the only way they think of, like 70% of Gazans have never left the Gaza Strip. Just take that number. I mean, when someone is living under Hamas, they've never left. They have experienced Israeli bombardment. They see the images of the West Bank. I'm not justifying it. I'm not saying it's correct, but like it's hard to kind of try to push them to get rid of that image and get rid of that kind of simplistic, you can say violent thinking. That said, I will say that when I went to school here in the United States in San Francisco, I mean, there was an agreement between our university and Saudi Arabia. There were tons and tons of Saudi students. Like, I think between the modern generation, I think with the Abraham Accords, I think with the social media age, I think with the travel. I mean, Saudi is a very different society right now than it was just 5 years ago, than it was 20 years ago, than it was when I was there. I mean, I grew up with the teachers like beating me up for having long fingernails or having not covering my mouth when I yawn, or eating with my left hand, saying I'm feeding Satan, or Satan is taking a leak or taking a dump in my mouth or my fingernails. I mean, it was traumatizing. I was beat up for the silliest of things, and I actually was essentially forced to memorize. I memorized 5 chapters of the Quran. Okay, it was a religious instruction school. So to answer your question, with regards to Palestinians, I don't think it's the vast majority. And now, are the vast majority of Palestinians gonna just hug every Jew and Israeli they see? Absolutely not. Do I think there's a lot of potential for moving the huge group that's in the middle? So let's say, forget the irredeemables, that like, let's just say 25% who are ideologically aligned with either the Islamism of Hamas or just the beliefs that, like Jews, there's no coexistence with them, whatever. And then you have maybe 5 to 10% that are like overtly, let's say probably closer to 10%, that are overtly and openly pro-peace, calling or willing to engage. Like, I'm talking about the Palestinians engaged in the groups in the West Bank and inside Israel, and even very few in Gaza. I'm thinking about the mass in between those two groups. I genuinely believe that should there be sustainable stability, sustainable ceasefire, economic development, political developments, economic rights alone will not bring about lasting peace. There has to be justice in terms of stop the settlements, stop the violence in the West Bank, access to Jerusalem, and a kind of a long-term pathway to a Palestinian state that actually has control and sovereignty. I am willing to go out on a limb and bet my life that a larger number, I'm trying to say this, oh my God, I can't. A bigger group of Palestinians than not will absolutely embrace Jews and embrace the idea that we will be neighbors and embrace coexistence. And I'll tell you something, they'll embrace it before many Arabs or Muslims in the nearby Arab countries do, because that's a lot of those people. And I'm sorry, with due respect to a lot of the good people in the Arab and Muslim world, and especially in the Middle East, they don't really matter, because they've been fed a steady diet of propaganda, resistance. And even though the regimes in a lot of these Arab countries have tried to, like they have their own political orientation that's more aligned with peaceful coexistence and diplomatic relationships with Israel, a lot of the people on the street, I mean, people in Amman in Jordan are like attacking me and attacking any Gazans that want peace and coexistence. I mean, give me a break, dude. So anyway, I hope that wasn't a rambling answer. I hope that was actually useful.
No, that was perfect. Very briefly, man, when I grew up in Saudi, my boy was Palestinian, and the reason why is because I was really the only black kid in my high school. I was an outcast, and he was an outcast. So I'm very familiar with how other Arabs look down on Palestinians. It's a very real thing that I think it's very interesting how the Western world is usually not very familiar with that. I do have another question, but I want to let other people speak. So I like, hopefully if there's time, you can come back to me. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, I did want to say that I was surprised that your friend responded that way, because it is weird and ironic, but Palestinians actually are the least anti-Semitic of the Arabs. And I think it's because of what Ahmed said, because they've actually met Jewish people. They've worked with Jewish people. A lot of them were working in Israel, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas, you know, I talked about just like my own personal experience. My mom is Egyptian, my dad's Palestinian. My mom's side of my family, like viciously, like obsessively hateful of Jewish people. And my dad's side of the family is like, we got to work together. But it's because the Egyptians, to them, it doesn't really matter. It's like what you were saying, Ahmed, about Jordanians. It doesn't matter to them. They can just hate because it won't cost them. It's just like it's almost like it's like a boogeyman. You know what I mean? It's irrelevant to them.
Absolutely.
But when you're Palestinian or when you're living in Gaza, it matters. You know what I mean? This is your life. So you have to, you know, your health, your family's peace, security, all of those kinds of things, they're going to come first. You know what I mean? And you're going to be willing to engage with Israelis and look towards a peace process because you just want peace. People just want to live. Palestinians are not religious people. They're not like Pakistanis, and they're not like zealots. They're not. They're political. Sure, they're politically aware, of course, and there's a lot of disagreement. They hate Netanyahu. You know what I mean? Like you'll hear those kinds of sentiments. But when it comes down to just like straight up anti-Semitism, hating Jews for existing, you're going to hear that more in all of the surrounding Arab countries. So yeah.
And just briefly to your point, Yasmine, like, I mean, I think this was one of the questions you had on the original list, but like the amount of BS that like two things are true. Arab countries in general have supported the Palestinians in a variety of ways. I'm not in the slightest denying that, and like financially, politically, and otherwise. Also true, many Arab countries have treated the Palestinians like utter garbage, putting them in isolated ghettos in Jordan and Syria and Lebanon, and saying, oh, we're treating you like garbage, second-class citizens for your own good so that you can one day have the right of return. I mean, utter nonsense. Do you know that the Palestinian Authority passport, which I used to have before I became a citizen, like was one of the few, like most Arabs didn't need visas to enter other Arab countries, but Palestinians always needed a visa. They were always isolated. They were always prevented from free access because, oh, no, we don't want you to come into our country. You have to have a valid reason for being here, or else you're going to give up on your cause and you're going to give up on the right of return. And it's like, give me a break, dude. Like, I am just so sick of that attitude that I still think, sadly, you know, is very prevalent today in terms of like I'll never forget this. I will never forget this lady in San Francisco in 2007 when I was a 17-year-old. I'm 33 right now. I feel like I'm 63 in a 33-year-old body. But I was applying for political asylum and I was about to, you know, like have my interview. And this lady was like, oh my God, Ahmed, this is terrible. You shouldn't be in San Francisco. You should be in Gaza because that's the Zionist plan, is to empty the land from its people. And I said, and she was a Christian, by the way. She was not Muslim. She was a Christian lady in her tank tops. And I was like, well, why don't you, I was trying to be diplomatic. I was like, I'd love to see you in your tank tops living under Hamas, you know, like resisting, like, and by the way, like no shaming, like wear whatever you want. I'm pro free. I'm just saying,
yeah, but that's the
ironically
point. Yeah, it's just she's being such a hypocrite about it.
But she's in the United States and she's expressing this sentiment. This is what the Arab and Muslim world have been doing for decades for the Palestinians. It's like, go be in your shithole, go be in your ghettos for your own good, because we're doing this for you, you know, and I'm just sick of that.
It's for their own good is
Absolutely.
what it's for.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Ahmed. You're right. That was one of the questions, but I'm glad you responded to it. Julia, you're next.
Hi, I'm so pleased to be here. Before I ask my question, I just want to tell Ahmed that I want to thank him personally for helping me get out of my fog of war, you know, as an Israeli, after living October 7th and feeling like everything I believed was upended, and just hearing your empathetic and rational threads on Twitter really helped me get back to what I believe in and who I am. So thank you for that. I wanted to continue talking about the PA. You mentioned, of course, the corruption and the issues with Abbas. And there's always this idea that, Barghouti should come back. And I wanted to know what you think of him. The polls say that he's a very popular leader. Do you believe them? I think most of them are in the West Bank, the polls, but what do you have to say about that? And what do we do with the Pay for Slay Martyrs Fund that is such a huge barrier for me believing that we can get to a two-state solution?
So several things there. Big picture, just my ethos. And I criticize the PA, and like people are like, oh, now you're just criticizing all the Palestinian leaders. I actually genuinely think, like, I want the PA. I think if the PA collapses, that would be a disaster. I actually want the PA to be reformed. I want them as a kind of a provisional body, if you will, that'll help get us to a Palestinian state. So my overall interest is in seeing the PA survive, govern effectively, and evolve to kind of rise up to the occasion. Mr. Barghouti is a lovely man. I was just talking to an Israeli lady in the 90s. She was from, an Israeli lady who in the 90s was working with Meretz, and she was like, Barghouti was one of the first voices that was a prominent kind of promoter of engagement and dialogue. It's difficult to see how he would be released. I know Hamas is trying to get him released in the hostage negotiations. We'll see if that ever happens. I'm sure he's a lovely, wonderful human being on a lot of fronts. And what I will tell you, and I like hear this like chatter behind, this is not again chatter that's captured on in polls. Some Palestinians are a little bit traumatized by the Sinwar syndrome. So Yahya Sinwar, he actually said some pretty reasonable things in the past. Again, I'm not saying Barghouti is like it. I'm just, okay, Sinwar said some like things. He even had an interview in 2006 with an Israeli TV station that went into prison and interviewed him. And he actually like sounded reasonable. Sinwar has made some Palestinians worried about somebody in prison for years and years coming out and all of a sudden assuming all of this power, having all this baggage and untreated trauma and psychological challenges. So that's what I'm hearing from a lot of Palestinians, regardless of these, I love Dahlan. Oh, I'm sorry. Just because, stay with your question. So the pay for slay is a complicated thing complicated in the sense that there's an oversimplification of how it is carried out and conducted. I believe that the PA withholding, like basically they caused the financial crisis for themselves because they had an all or nothing approach. They said, we're going to keep doing this, even if it means our financing is compromised, is because the Israeli government won't release the tax money or like international community. I think that's terrible. I think that's not pragmatic. I think that's morally wrong, etc. The one scenario where I'll mention to you this so-called pay for slay fund, if you will, being something that has helped, like two samples of how it has been helpful to some Palestinians is, for example, somebody does a terror attack, okay? It is a matter of policy, which has been condemned by the international community, called collective punishment, blah, blah. The Israeli military, so God forbid, I go out and I kill Israelis or I attack Israelis. The Israeli military will come to my family's home and they will demolish it. Even though my family had nothing to do with it, they knew nothing. So the so-called pay for slay would give money to my family to basically give them an alternative, because this policy has been around for a long time, this home demolishing policy. And they're like home demolition, I'm sorry. And there are Israeli peace activists that do nothing but try to combat that. So that's one example. And then there are other examples where the same fund, the Pay for Slay fund, will actually also support people that are captured by or held prisoner by the Israeli military for reasons other than violent attacks. There are some arbitrary arrests. There is administrative detention. There are some unjust situations. So I'm just, again, in this, for the sake of intellectual honesty, trying to present a way in which the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian public has viewed this apparatus, if you will, that started with the PLO, by the way. The PLO back in the day used to pay the martyrs' families money. So do I think it should be reformed? Do I think it should be changed? Do I think there should be some sacrifices to stop paying? Like if somebody randomly goes and starts stabbing Israeli, like let's put aside the home demolition, to pay for their families, like stabbing Israelis or ramming Israelis at a random bus stop, like I think that's a messed up use of the people's funds, and I don't support it. But I'm saying there has to be a way in which we acknowledge that people who are unjustly targeted by aspects of the Israeli military occupation have benefited from this fund. So can that be separated from then people who, you know, from this overt, what it's, and I'll tell you something, by the way, I am willing to bet that almost no Palestinian who's sitting there thinking, I'm going to go and conduct a military operation against Israel, is personally directly feeling incentivized by this fund. So I don't have all the answers, but I encourage us to think of how this has actually helped some people and whether or not that can be separated or from the rest of the problematic aspects of this fund. But the problem is, I mean, I see the Palestinian Authority problems as far exceeding this. I mean, this is one, and I know for the Israelis, like emotionally charged and terrible aspect of the Palestinian Authority, and I absolutely agree and I understand, and I give you that wholeheartedly. My thing goes beyond that in terms of the Palestinian Authority, in terms of them not providing a transparent governance and the true separation of powers. Abbas basically being a 5-year, a 20-something year, a 19-year president on an expired 5-year term. The corruption, the theft. I mean, my goodness, the amount of money that from Arafat days to the nowadays between the PA and Hamas, billions of dollars in aid were completely wasted. They could have built 3 Palestinian states, not one. So like that to me, and the fat cats in the Palestinian Authority that genuinely don't want a change in the status quo, that genuinely don't want to give the younger generation a chance at governance, is appalling. Like, so I think that is a far greater hindrance that needs to be addressed. And I wish the United States and I wish the European Union would push for tangible and concrete revitalization steps instead of just waiting for the Palestinian Authority to self-initiate those reforms. So yeah, I share your frustration about various aspects of the PA.
Thank you.
Okay, so Asif, you're next.
Yeah. Thank you. Hello, nice to meet you. I really liked reading all the stuff that you do. Really appreciate it. So I have like a question about like scenarios that will happen after this war, or how could this war even end? Like, because it's very hard for me to actually see what will happen, and I have like a more specific kind of question. If I try to think on the history, like my first thought is like, will it be like after World War I, where it will be like we had a huge war, but it isn't enough or something like that? Or will it be like post-World War II, where you know something has to change? That's my kind of worry. So like, do we actually see like any optimistic scenarios for the end of the war? Like, I don't know.
Understood. Yeah, so I mean, there's something to be said about, I mean, Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan are often invoked as the examples of de-radicalization and like post-war development, etc. And people overlook an important yet potentially incredibly uncomfortable fact. I mean, we may have defeated the Nazis and the Japanese militarily, but huge parts of Imperial Japan were left intact. The emperor stayed around. A lot of Japanese troops stuck around with their guns and weapons, even though they surrendered ultimately to the Allies. A lot of Nazis were rehabilitated in Western Germany. In the United States, Operation Paperclip, bringing them to, look at like von Braun and our rocket program. So like the thing that is chronically missing from the picture is, and that's not because I love Hamas. I want Hamas, if I could just wave that magic wand, just make him disappear. But there aren't any real ideas out there for how do you actually rehabilitate some or all or parts or a few of Hamas politically and administratively. And so I have been, like I said, I wrote that paper and trying to push for maybe like to retrieve some of the guns and weaponry that some of the Hamas fighters will have to do very lucrative buybacks for a buyback program for all the guns that Hamas members hold, to basically offer some of the Hamas members an off-ramp to basically undergo all sorts of trainings and engagement that can allow them to be part of a future police force or administrative body, etc. That to some people, it sounds awful because after the horror of October 7th, I understand it's very difficult. And there are some parts of Hamas that are, like I said, are irredeemable and are criminal beyond any hope. And I do hope there's the equivalent of the Nuremberg trials for some of those folks. That said, again, Japan's and Germany's pacification did not entail the 100% of every Nazi or every imperial soldier. The two biggest things that I have, so this leads into, to directly answer your question, I think the two biggest missing ideas or tangible proposals or forthcoming plans right now are a provisional security apparatus, and I have called for a provisional peacekeeping force from the Arab world, from Jordan and Egypt and others, with economic, both of these countries are debt-ridden, both of them with the right economic and financial incentives, both of them already contribute to peacekeeping in different parts of the world, especially Jordan, would absolutely be viable participants who could play a role in filling that security vacuum so that we don't have an ISIS or a mutation of Hamas taking that over. So that's number one. And then number two is to actually engage, like basically try to splinter Hamas, try to keep, like find out who in Hamas is willing to be part of a future government based on the understanding that this isn't going to be built upon, from the river to the sea, armed resistance, like all that garbage that Hamas's religious political program. And I genuinely think that you would be surprised by how many could, with the right incentives and the right framing and the right, call it protection, or the right context, would absolutely jump ship, because Hamas is a sinking ship. There's no doubt about it. So that's what I've been like behind the scenes, desperately trying to say, like, yalla, like, let's talk, guys. Like we didn't fully annihilate all of Japan or Germany. We talked to them. We co-opted some of them. So can you co-opt some of the Hamas folks? And then the third one is actually going back to the humanitarian aid. I mean, I genuinely think that by stabilizing Gaza from a humanitarian point of view, that prevents the even if you want to carry out the military operation. I mean, Israel in the past carried out military operations and wars against Hamas while also having hundreds of trucks daily crossing in at a rate that's greater than what we're seeing right now. I understand this is a far greater, more destructive, more encompassing war, but I think stabilizing Gaza from a humanitarian point of view is a fundamental component of actually increasing the likelihood of a better outcome. Because when you have a population that's not hungry or that's not desperate, you can do a lot more in engaging that population and orienting them towards a different future. And then finally, and I would say most importantly, de-radicalization isn't going to come from on the top of an Israeli tank. The de-radicalization is going to be a gradual process that is built upon just stop the killing, stop the war, feed people, prevent famine, and then a gradual improvement in quality of life, rebuilding, reconstruction, in parallel with a serious political program to establish a Palestinian state. And, you know, it's like, people are like, well, we don't want to reward Hamas's like crimes. No one said reward it, but I mean, the peace between Egypt and Israel came after the 73 war. Like, wars are often, even if they're started by horrific and horrible circumstances or acts, it is not uncommon for wars to be followed up by lasting peace or by peace agreements or by a new reality. So it's not enough to just rebuild Gaza. There has to be a program to recognize a Palestinian state, even if that state doesn't have full sovereignty immediately, but give the Palestinians something to feel like we have this to protect, we have this to work towards, we have this to work on, and they will absolutely engage in nation building, even if it takes a while to undo the trends of violence or the belief that somehow we can get rid of all the Jews on the land. And I'll tell you right now, most Palestinians know that there's no from the river to the sea. They know that's not going to happen. They know Israel's a nuclear state that's not going anywhere. But more importantly, Israel isn't just any state. Israel is a state that we have a lot to learn from, medically, economically, and otherwise. So I think, and one other point, actually, just to mention, I worry tremendously about the fragmentation of Gaza, like the Somalia scenario. I think that will be disastrous, not just for Palestinians, but it will be disastrous for Israel. I worry about the right-wing nut jobs, not just Smotrich and Ben Gvir, but there are a lot of organizations backing them trying to resettle Gaza. I think that if you want to save Hamas, if you want to ensure Hamas lives on, and I mean this wholeheartedly, this is not a talking point, you go and try to settle Gaza. That will inject so much life into the resistance narrative, into like, oh, you see, we told you this is all about them wanting to kick us out and push us out. And one more important thing to note is that's unfortunately part of the failed strategy in how this war was conducted. And I mean, there was absolutely a plan to push Gazans into the Sinai. And when Egypt stood its ground and said, absolutely not, that's why this sector specific, when they said to 1.5 million people in Gaza, like all the military strategists were like, the hell are you doing? Like I've talked to some of the military folks on the US who were advising the Israeli military. I mean, the thought was to do a simultaneous multi-sector offensive. But instead, because of a political decision inspired by some of the crazy right-wing nut jobs that thought, oh, this is our opportunity to do that transfer of Gazans. Finally, let's push them to Sinai. They did this like, okay, we're going to start in the north, and we're going to push people to the south. And by the time we get to the south, most of them would have gone into Egypt. And that has backfired horribly.
Egypt doesn't want them.
Mhm.
Eric.
أهلا وسهلا يا أحمد. يعني عندي سؤال واحد لك، يعني إيش حلمك للقطاع، يعني إيش حلمك لغزة بعد هاي الحرب؟ يعني مثلا يعني قبل هاي الحرب أنا رحت كثير الضفة وحكيت مع ناس هناك، وكثير منهم حكوا لي إذا يعني بطلة الشباب بتقدر يعني تنزل من يعني 50 في المية إلى مثلا 40%. أنا راكم سعيد. يعني إيش بدك يعني إيش بدك يعني للقطع وللفلسطين بشكل عام؟
Sure. So that was asking
I'll
what my
get you to
dream.
translate that, please, Ahmed, because most of my
Yeah.
listeners don't
No,
speak
I'll
Arabic.
just thank you, Eric. Thank you. Great question. No, just my dream and vision and aspiration for the Gaza Strip, you know, after this. Shukran, Eric. Shukran, Ilak. So I mean, I wrote a little bit about this in my last piece with Haaretz in terms of, I mean, I'm absolutely 100% dreaming big. And I don't mean that in like a very like, oh, I'm dreaming. Oh, like this is going to be great. I know it's grim. I said, honestly, short term, it's very grim. I'm still mourning the loss of my family members. I'm still super concerned about the operation in Rafah and its implications. There is so much and wondering about what becomes of Hamas after the war. However, I am absolutely dreaming big. I believe that this is going to be Gaza's last war. I believe that Gaza has a unique opportunity to turn into the kind of beating heart of an incoming Palestinian state. And that will be done by economic development, by healing, by giving people the space to kind of get back on their feet. What I love about the airdrops and the maritime corridor, even though obviously they're done in full coordination with Israel, as they should be, is they've symbolically shown that Gaza, like by using the air and by using the sea, Gaza has so much potential. We can deliver aid and commerce and we can move people in and out. I ran a nonprofit organization in the United States to build a humanitarian airport, an IDF, UN internationally run airport in Gaza. Made a lot of progress, and including with Israelis and talking with Israelis. So my dream is to see Gaza as a role model for effective Palestinian governance, for effective stability as a tool towards state building, and most importantly, to prove that when the military occupation of the West Bank ends and those settlements, one way or another, are addressed either through territorial swaps, vacating most of them, and other solutions, the Palestinians are incredibly capable of governing the West Bank, and which I actually think that is the true heart of the Palestinian state, because it's geographically bigger, there are a lot more resources, the topography is diverse. A lot of those refugees, I mean, in Jordan and in Syria and in Lebanon, could totally come back to the West Bank. I also dream of doing artificial islands off the coast of Gaza and having those become economic development zones and even living environments. I'm not talking about Dubai style ones, but I'm talking about expanding Gaza's kind of territorial reach to again absorb more people. Like, I'm dreaming big. With Hamas, however, there's nothing good. With Hamas in its current shape and form in control of Gaza, nothing good is going to happen to the Palestinian people. And that's why I think, yes, I understand, like, you can't, you know, drop roses on Hamas. I understand that they're a violent terrorist group that has to be confronted. But a military solution alone will never address this issue.
Got it. Thank you.
شكرا على السؤال إيريك، العربي بتاعك رائع.
شكرا
انت
لك.
جامد قوي.
يعني عشت في الأردن يعني
I see.
يعني عشان هيك بحكي عربي.
Good for you, man.
Very impressive. Adrienne, you're next.
Hi. Thank you so much, Yasmine, for hosting, and thank you, Ahmed. This has been really helpful. I had two main questions. The first is maybe what's your analysis of the U.S. government's current approach with Israel? Like, do you think that, you know, all is well, or they could be doing a little bit more, actions versus inactions? And second question, we often hear two mainstream discourses, which is why this is so helpful. Either, okay, Israel's committing genocide, or Hamas is responsible for everything bad happening to Palestinians and Israel's justified. So it's almost like we have to situate ourselves in one of either of those two camps. And so we hear, okay, Hamas is shooting at its own people, and no, it's the IDF that's doing. So it's all very confusing. So second question, I guess, is how do we make sense of all this? What news do we look at? With regard to the term genocide, you have family there. What do they feel is, like, is there nuance? I mean, you've been speaking about the nuance the whole time, but I'm still kind of stuck on, you know, those two camps. Like, it almost feels like you have to choose one or the other, or you're just, you're sort of accused as walking the line. So yeah, I guess, what, can you speak to that and maybe your family's perspective as well? And yeah, thank you.
Certainly. Thank you, Adrian. So, I mean, the United States government is very frustrated with what's happening right now for a variety of reasons. The US feels like it gave Israel unwavering support in terms of right after October 7th, political backing at the UN, vetoing all those ceasefire resolutions, providing tons of munitions and firearms to the Israeli military. But a lot of military advisors believe that the Israeli approach has not been particularly effective. The deteriorating humanitarian conditions have put the United States in a tough position, and the US has kind of lost a lot of its goodwill capital, if you will, by standing firmly behind Israel's military offensive in Gaza. And so there's a kind of, and we've seen the implications of that from a kind of the electoral politics side of it here. So there's immense frustration. There's immense worry that the United States could be politically, directly, morally, and otherwise be held responsible, partly responsible, for having stood behind this now 5-month-long military operation. So that's why I think the United States pushing the Israeli military and leadership to conduct to allow for greater flow of humanitarian aid, even if some of that has materialized, some of it has not materialized, some of it will maybe happen, won't happen. We've seen also that I think the United States is concerned both politically, but even a lot of like this mainstream Jewish community leadership is worried about the longer this goes on, the way this has been conducted is potentially, is bringing global support for Israel to historic lows. And the United States government feels like it's going to be, a part of that. So do I think more can and should be done? Absolutely. Do I think, however, there is a slight oversimplification sometimes, and I catch a lot of crap for saying this, but I don't care. People think that the United States can turn on a switch just because, yes, the US support for Israel is steadfast. The US gives a lot of aid to Israel, and aid generally means you should be able to exercise leverage over the recipients. That is true. While it is also true that the United States cannot just turn on and off a switch that stops the war or forces Israel into certain actions. The United States criticized Saudi Arabia for its conduct in Yemen and during that war, and yet US support for Saudi didn't translate to a US ability to completely stop that war, fully influence Saudi behavior. Egypt, after the 2013 situation with the military taking over and unseating Morsi from power, the United States cut off aid, but Egypt nevertheless stayed on its own course in what it perceived as its own interests. And then the US eventually resumed aid. So like there are numerous examples where, like Turkey, for example, like the US cut off Turkey from the F-35 fighter jet program because the Turks purchased the S-400 air defense system from Russia. But the Turks went ahead and like persevered. So believe it or not, even with billions of dollars in annual aid, and like even with all the military support that the United States has provided the Israelis with, the Biden administration and the State Department and the president, the White House, cannot single-handedly stop Israel's actions or guide them in one way or another. They can exert tremendous pressure, and how that pressure translates to action is something separate. But support for Israel is largely, I mean, it comes from Congress. Some of the munitions were approved by the State Department. It's like there's a lot of nuance in how the US can exert pressure on Israel. Some commentators and analysts out there, they're like, President Biden can stop this war like that. He could overnight stop it. And that's just not true, even with the billions of dollars that the US provides. Moving on to the second part of your question, and I think that, like, yes, I mean, when I say multiple things are true at once, I will say, I mean, there is absolute Israeli propaganda, and they'll tell you as much. Like, there is a desire to say that Israel is not responsible for the suffering, and we let in all the humanitarian aid. It's as if Israel has nothing to do with what's happening, and I've condemned that, and I think that's hogwash, and I think Israel absolutely bears a tremendous amount of responsibility, regardless of the fact that, yes, of course, Israel was attacked, and they have, like any nation attacked, are going to respond to that attack militarily. I'm not disputing that. I'm not saying Israel should just like say, okay, like we're not going to do anything. But to deny that the Israeli military has committed horrible actions, whether they were mistakes, whether they were deliberate, whether they were bad intelligence, whether the weapons went astray, like I still don't know why 31 family members of mine were killed, even though there were children as young as 3 and 4 months old, shredded. Like, I'm never going to sit here, and I don't care what any pro-Israel person come at me, dude. I don't care what you say. That was a war crime. That was horrible. That was atrocious. And I will forever have grievances with the state of Israel, even though I am willing to reconcile and push forward. And I think this is far bigger than me or my pain or my family. This is about two peoples, millions of people finding a way amidst the horrible bloodshed. On the other side, there's absolutely crimes by Hamas. I mean, Hamas wants hunger. Hamas wants dead Palestinians. Hamas, in the way they conduct their own, they think they're a people's militia. They think they have every right to operate how they see fit so that they can target the Israelis. So, and for years, I mean, I helped a dude get his family out of Beit Hanun in northern Gaza because Hamas in 2014 were launching missiles and rockets from his home near his areas. And when he confronted them, they threatened him, and they thought that they told him, like, what's the worst that could happen? You know, you're going to die. We're all going to die one day. Why not go out as martyrs? You know, and he was like, screw you. I don't want to be a martyr. I want to live. I want to protect my family. So Hamas, for example, absolutely hindered and told people not to evacuate. When the Israeli military people told people to leave the north, Hamas not only hid that information from people, and people ironically had to go on Facebook, those who had some internet, to listen to the Israeli spokesperson in Arabic, the Munassab, the Kogat guy, to actually hear the evacuation orders. There are reports that I have heard from multiple people, and I've tried so hard to document, and some of them, like many, have told me that Hamas fired at some civilians who were trying to evacuate because they want to keep the civilians around so that they could use them as human shields. Does that mean that Israel didn't attack the civilians that were evacuating? No. Israel absolutely hit. Again, you can say it's faulty intelligence. Maybe there was a Hamas guy nearby, whatever. So then Gazans were like, well, we're terrified. We don't want to evacuate because we're afraid. So they were caught up between the two parties. And that's just the tragedy of the situation. So who do you believe? I don't believe any of it. I do believe both in a way, like it's both are true. Like there's a kernel of truth to both, but both are also propagandists, both are lying, and both are full of shit. And Israel's propaganda, I will say, sometimes I'm like, dude, like you really could use a better communications spokesperson. And Hamas's propaganda is so disgusting because I've lived through it. I know that like they don't want the airdrops because they not only want to control and tax the aid coming in, but they also actually like they love scenes of starving, like these apocalyptic scenes of skinny people like hunger dying, you know, like or scenes of Gazans swarming aid trucks. my God, that injects life into Hamas. So I'm saying let's disarm Hamas by actually feeding people, by actually preventing large-scale atrocities. And Israel has effectively destroyed most of Gaza right now. Like the big-scale operations are done. There's nowhere else to go except Rafah, essentially, right now. So use precision, use those drones, the same drones that effectively got that Aruri guy in Lebanon, the Hamas military dude in Lebanon. I think all eyes are on Rafah right now, and how that military operation is conducted could absolutely make or break Hamas, not from the point of view of, oh, well, you're going to decimate their battalions. Who cares about Hamas's battalions? They can stand up new battalions in a year, in a month. They can probably get 500 guys with some AKs and a couple of RPGs and call that a battalion, a katiba. Hamas will live long-term if civilian casualties in Rafah are atrocious and horrendous, and if we see more apocalyptic scenes of hunger. I hope that answered your question. It's complicated, it's nuanced, there are no easy answers, but both things can be true at once. Yasmine, I know we're running out of time. I think I can do one more question.
Okay. Sarah, last but not least.
Hi, yes. Hi, Ahmed. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for speaking about this. I really enjoyed the whole nuanced conversation and how you talk about everything being true all at once. And it's really interesting that you don't get affected by the propaganda and you see the truth behind it. I come from Iran, similar to Elnaz, so we've had very similar experiences. And when you talk about the two-state solution, about how these two peoples can live together, that's very beautiful. I'm not sure how realistic that is though, because you have a very optimistic view of things despite everything that's happened to you. I don't know how you manage that. I have a very bleak view of everything. And for me, it's not just Israel or just Palestine or just Israel and Palestine in a vacuum. I see, and I'm not taking away the agency of Israelis or IDF or Hamas and Palestinians. I want to say that I understand that how this is just a disaster on all levels happening, but I see also how Palestinians and Hamas itself can be used as a pawn by the Islamic regime in Iran because they want this. They need this kind of disastrous war to go on for as long as it does. And even if you dismantle Hamas, I think that mentality cannot be dismantled that easily. Like even if you take away all their guns, I'm not sure how realistically you can get to that two-state solution that looks so beautiful and peaceful and a dream for a lot of people, because I think the Islamist allies all around the world, especially in MENA, they don't want that. For whatever reason, and we know the nefarious reasons behind it, I think they're having a field day at this point, and they're feeding into this volatile situation by the propaganda. Every time there is a protest happening downtown Toronto, I can see the Islamic regime's flags and Taliban flags. And I'm like, so what's the point then? I'm not going to go join this protest because they have the country's flag that has traumatized me beyond health, beyond being safe anymore, being sane anymore. So I'm not sure how you can reach to that point and how you can cut off the influence that the Islamists have on Palestine and on Israel on the other side of this whole thing.
So, I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right? I mean, that's definitely a valid concern. I will tell you this. I mean, I would never underestimate people's will and desire to live. And I genuinely think this war in Gaza has, for so many people who are now like saying, you know what, actually, maybe Hamas's martyrdom is bullshit. And most people want to live, even those who support the resistance. So I genuinely think that the solution isn't just going to be a matter of de-radicalization and people. Like, it's going to be a pragmatic realization that we need to live, we have to make this work. and we have to navigate this incredibly messy environment and situation. So I would never underestimate the power of that just on its own in shaping and forging in shaping a different future and motivating people to forge a different path forward. What I will say is that, I mean, yes, the control and influence of the Islamists will take some time to undermine, but and that's the problem, is sometimes, like looking at Egypt, I mean, I wonder, like, Egypt used the kind of iron grip approach, and I don't know if, for example, the current government is no longer empowering Egypt, would the Islamists then easily walk back in or not? So like there's a thing to be said about the efficacy, the short and medium term efficacy of an iron grip to just like push them out and exclude them. And I, at this point, genuinely believe that's the only way forward. But I also worry about an inorganic de-radicalization not having the beneficial long-term desired outcomes. I think a lot of people in Palestine, if given a true option to have long-term stability, to have rights, and I think there has to be a recognition with all the aforementioned. I am the first to tell you there's an asymmetry of power. I mean, yes, they're both sides. It's funny. Two things are true at once. Both sides honestly do some things that I swear to God are just like mirror image of each other, with some of the propaganda, with some of the dehumanization. People are like, oh, look at like Israeli kids being taken to a tank museum and guns and whatever. And then you look at pictures in Gaza of like kindergarten graduations with like guns and weapons. It's like on and on and on. So there is a, I hate to say it this way because this word is demonized, a both sidism component to this conflict, but there's also a tremendous asymmetry of power. I mean, Israel is a nuclear superior power nation with a standing army and air force and an economy, and the Palestinians are kind of disparate groups of fragmented territories and fragmented political entities. That said, I think both people, even like clearly Israel's military superiority has not achieved lasting security for the Jewish people. And clearly Hamas's terrorism and the Palestinians' unwillingness to fundamentally try something different has not achieved liberation and freedom. So like, I do think in a weird way, both people are forced, despite the discrepancy, both people are being forced now through a horrendous set of circumstances to face the reality through a pragmatic lens and realize that there has to be a different path forward. So that's what makes me optimistic on the Palestinian side. But I will also tell you that with a Netanyahu government and Ben Gvir and Smotrich, nothing good's going to happen on the Israeli side. I don't care how much you want to say Hamas is responsible for it. Like, both feed off of each other. Like the right wing in Israel, absolutely. And this is actually I'll conclude on this, Yasmine. This was actually a point that a question that you had in your original sheet. I talk about Hamas being useful idiots to the anti-Palestinian, anti-peace establishments in Israel. And this isn't a conspiracy. This is like an openly discussed, like in Israeli media and Reuters and Times of Israel and the Jerusalem Post, Netanyahu saying, do you want me to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state? Well, let Qatar send billions or millions of dollars of cash to keep Hamas in power. The Hamas morons thought that we are persevering and we are here in spite of Israel. What they didn't know is that they were a God-sent gift to Israel. They were an absolute gift from heaven to the anti-Palestinian forces that said, oh, look, we don't have a viable negotiating partner. Abbas only controls the West Bank. Hamas is like Hamasistan, and it's a citadel for terrorism. We can't give the Palestinians a state. We can't negotiate. So that's one of the things that I say to a lot of these stupid leftists that don't know their top from bottom, is like, please think of how Hamas has undermining Palestinian unity, they've not only weakened the kind of the united front for a Palestinian state, if you will, but they've enabled the right wing in Israel to point to Hamas's terrorism and say, look, these people only know military occupation. I gotta keep them under the boot. They've enabled Israel to say, oh, we don't have a negotiating partner, even though I dispute that narrative, because I think even though Abbas, for all his faults, was desperate to get some kind of a deal in the West Bank, which is ironic because, like, well, why did you reject the 2008 deal? And after that, you were like, oh, please come back and negotiate another deal. Nevertheless, Hamas has been a useful idiot. And I mean, Israel, I mean, I'm sorry. Israel basically let this mini Hamasistan take shape. Like, Israel had the intelligence. They saw the tunnels. They saw the armaments. They saw the open training for leading up to October 7th. And they thought they could manage them. They thought they could bribe them with Qatari funds to keep them in power so that they keep the Palestinians divided. And so, just to conclude, and I insist on concluding on a positive note, of course it's bleak. Of course there's no short term. I don't have all the answers. I log in every day, man. I swear to God, every day I want to walk away from this. I work in international development. That's how I make my living. Like, every day, I mean, Yasmine, I was sharing with you just the other day this disgusting threat. I get threats and harassment all the time, and I don't care. I'm a tough guy. I have male privilege. Like, I have the means to defend myself. Like, my stuff is scrubbed off the internet. Fine, but imagine how many more Palestinians, or how many Palestinian women, not just Palestinian men. Unfortunately, women's voices are often marginalized in the Israel and Palestine. I mean, it is both a patriarchal society, but also a lot of women feel incredibly unsafe to speak their mind. And a lot of women, if given a chance, they would absolutely be peacemakers. So I genuinely, despite every day is hell. At a personal level, getting on Twitter, both sides, the pro-Palestine people and the pro-Israel people, I would say now it's genuinely like a 50-50. Before, it was like maybe like a 70-30, but and I'm not out there to antagonize both. I'm trying to establish common ground across our differences. And that entails sharing a lot of uncomfortable facts. And I'm not going to be a tool for pro-Israel people that think, oh, we just need him to, criticize Hamas, criticize the Palestinian leadership, but keep his mouth shut and say Israel's perfect, there's no problems, everything's fine. And the minute I open my mouth about Israel, they're like, oh, you piece of trash, you're a snake, and you're not authentic, and you're horrible. And screw those people and screw those people. There's a lot in the middle. There are a lot of people like yourself, like so many people who are following
on that.
Exactly, who genuinely want something different. And I feel like I have done more to humanize the people of Gaza and to inject that nuance than 1,000 protests in any Western capital could have. And I talked to so many Israelis who tell me, man, I was into peace, and then I gave up after October 7th, and then you helped me kind of calm down a little bit or come back to my senses from that. Or people who are like, you know what, dude, I'm all behind Israel. I'm all behind the IDF. I'm all behind the operation. But you force me in an uncomfortable way to actually think that there are civilians who are being killed by our military operation, and thinking about your family and thinking about you, and you have nothing to do with Hamas. Your family's not Hamas, and yet they're being killed. And that ability to humanize the people of Gaza is valuable, even in a short term, even in an intangible way. So there's that. There's what I said about, I think Gazans are done once and for all with war. There's, I think, sorry to end on this also this somewhat, but there's a great book out there, and, this is the title of the book. It's called Everything is Fucked. I encourage you all to read it. It was a bestseller, and it was talking about this gentleman who was a bestseller. His other book was The Art of Not Giving a Fuck. But his book was talking about how hope emerges out of despair and misery. If life is perfect and everything is fine, why develop hope? Why want something better? So it is precisely the misery and the war and the death and the destruction that's taking place in Gaza that gives me hope for a different path forward, for a different future. Yes, that future is uncertain. Yes, we don't know what becomes of the vacuum, what becomes of Hamas. Is Netanyahu going to go? Is Trump going to come back into office? There's an endless array of uncertainties. But what I have control and agency over is offering humanization. Well, first of all, humanizing both sides, talking to Israelis, talking to hostages, talking to families of hostages, and kind of sharing a missing narrative of Palestinians that is lost in the polarized world, offering humanitarian solutions that save a few lives or a few thousand lives or feed people, and supporting pragmatic paths forward, offering uncomfortable assessments about the Israeli role in the war and the Israeli atrocities, but also about Hamas and about the failures of the Palestinian leadership and just the delusions. I mean, we need leaders that don't take Palestinian sentiments and just like repeat them. We need leaders that also challenge the dominant narratives and challenge people to not only get out of their comfort zone, but to say, hey, there's no alternative but peace and coexistence. There's no full right of return. Those like stories about I have my keys from Haifa, I'm sorry. My grandparents on both sides were pushed out of historic Palestine. But I know that we're not going back to Rehovot and Ramla. We're not going back to Yafa, okay? I know that. So we need leaders that challenge the entrenched narratives. And I'm certainly no leader. I view myself as just one of many Palestinians who are fed up. But I intend to use my Western privilege, my male privilege, my sense of well-being and ability to defend myself and control myself, my environment, to speak out and to offer a voice that's different. Not like those who come to the Western world, who go to Europe and are PhD holders, and yet they are even more radical than people in Gaza. It's like, I understand people in the West Bank or in Gaza maybe being hesitant or having a hard time seeing things differently. But when you get out and you start promoting the garbage resistance narrative, you are truly the enemy of the Palestinian people. So I see a shift. It's going to happen. It's not going to be kumbaya. We're not going to all hug each other out. Well, I'm happy to hug whoever wants to hug. But I'm saying the people, it's going to be a while. It's going to take some time. But I genuinely see a shift emerging out of this misery and this horror.
Thank you, Ahmed. I really appreciate it. And I really do hope so that you are right about this, because we need something good to happen at this point in this world. We need hope. And I appreciate your positive attitude and the explanation and the answer. Thank you. Thank you, Yasmine.
We need to get rid of the Iranian regime, Sarah. Just like they
Yes, thank you
started,
very
they started this whole mess. And once they're toppled, it will help end this whole mess as well.
I hate to center everything around, like, I'm not
But
a
it's
narcissist.
just they are. Yeah.
I see the evil that they are, and it hurts that so many people are dying because of this evil regime. So I need that hope. I need what Ahmed is talking about to be real for my own sake, for my own sanity. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I mean, they're not only in Gaza, they're in Syria, they're in Yemen, they're everywhere, right?
Yes.
Their tentacles are everywhere, and people, it's
like a hydra.
It's a big problem. It's a lot more. Exactly.
It's a hydra. You cut off Hamas. There will be something else coming. So
way beyond Hamas versus Israel.
Exactly. So this hope, it's helpful. So thank you. Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for your question. As always, so thoughtful. And thank you, Ahmed, for giving us so much of your time. You still got quite a few people that want to ask you questions, but you did say that you wanted to head out. So I urge you to take a look at the comments that are happening in the chat here. And so you can see all the people that are sending you their love and thanking you so much for your rational voice in such an irrational time. Adrian commented on it, and so did you, about how there's these two camps, both extremists, both only willing to see black and white, simplistic, childish, uninformed, extremes. And it's It's really good for all of our hearts to hear your voice and to know that there are rational people and that we belong to this community here in the middle, and that we don't have to choose one of those two sides.
And I promise you with all my heart and wholeheartedly and sincerely that they might not be outspoken, they might not be on Twitter with thousands of followers, they might not be writing articles online, but thousands upon thousands of Gazans genuinely think and believe various pieces of what I've been sharing for the last couple of hours, even if they're unable to express it. And I encourage you to always resist the temptation to think of any people, Gazans, Palestinians, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Zionists, as a monolithic singular group. And there's a silent majority that absolutely rejects the garbage of Islamism and Hamas and genuinely wants peaceful coexistence, even if it takes a while, like they absolutely would welcome that over martyrdom and being used as pawns by the mullahs in Tehran.
Yeah, absolutely. And we need to support them and we need to empower them. Thank you so much.
And we need to feed them
Ahmed.
too. We got to feed them
Yes.
first. So go
Yeah,
airdrops.
we got to go up, move up the Maslow's hierarchy of needs here. But yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely correct. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yasmine.
And thank you so much, Ahmed. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye, y'all. Thank you.
After hearing all that, you might be left wondering, what can I do? How can I help? Well, this is why I created a nonprofit called Free Hearts, Free Minds. We are the only organization dedicated exclusively to helping these free thinkers. We empower them with our programs and supportive community, lifting them up so they can heal, speak out, and begin to make positive changes, not just in their own lives, but within the broader community around them. If this is a cause that resonates with you and you want to make a difference, one way to do that is by donating to Free Hearts, Free Minds. Because not enough people care about this cause, we need people like you to help fuel this change. You can donate via our website, freeheartsfreeminds.com. Thank you. Every dollar you donate makes a difference.